Washington, winter 1970. Elvis Presley sits alone in a dim hotel room at the Washington Hotel. The world knows him as the King, but tonight he is just a man hunched over a piece of paper, his pen scratching nervously across the page. The letter is addressed to President Richard Nixon. In it, Elvis pleads for a chance to serve his country in a way no song could, to fight against drugs, to stand against communism, to prove he is more than rhinestones and applause. The room is silent, broken only by the sound of ink dragging across paper and the faint hum of the city outside. His eyes burn with purpose. This is no stage act. This is a man reaching for history. But before the ink is even dry, the phone rings. A voice on the other end, crisp, official, undeniable. Mr. Presley, the President has read your words. He will see you. But first, he has a request. The show you've promised thousands, the event the world is waiting for. The President of the United States is asking you to cancel it. The pen slips from Elvis's hand. Silence swallows the room. One man, one country, one impossible choice. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The winter of 1970 hung heavy over Washington, gray skies pressing low over the city. In Memphis, far from the marble halls of politics, Elvis Presley sat awake in his Graceland living room, unable to sleep. His career was still gilded in gold, yet he felt an invisible weight pulling him down. The Vegas residencies had given him triumph on stage, but also trapped him in a loop of glitter and routine. Behind the sequined jumpsuits and thunderous applause, there was a gnawing fear that the world no longer saw him as a man, but as a spectacle. And Elvis, raised on hymns and patriotic marches, longed to be more than just the king of rock and roll. On his coffee table lay newspapers filled with headlines about drug overdoses, protests, riots. The young were drifting into chaos, many idolizing him, but ignoring the values he himself cherished. He read about soldiers returning from Vietnam to a divided country. Elvis's chest tightened with the thought that his voice, once so electrifying, might no longer matter in such a fractured America. It was then, in the quiet of the early morning, that an idea struck him, sudden, unpolished, but burning with urgency. If he could meet the President, not as an entertainer but as a concerned citizen, he might help turn the tide. He wanted to offer himself as a weapon against the drug epidemic and as a symbol of national pride. For once, Elvis thought, he might matter not as a singer, but as a soldier of culture. He scribbled down thoughts in long, uneven lines, his handwriting almost frantic. Mr. President, I can be of service to this country in a way that no one else can. I want to use my influence to help, to protect the young from the very thing destroying them. The words felt raw but sincere. He folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and stared at it as though it carried his very soul. And then, with the impulsive energy that had always defined him, he acted. He told no one, not his manager, not even most of his inner circle. Before dawn, he packed a small bag. Into it he slid a crisp black suit, a wide gold belt that shimmered like armor, and a Colt pistol, the same weapon he often carried, more as a symbol of independence than of violence. He left behind the security detail that normally shadowed him. This time, he wanted no entourage, no spectacle, just Elvis, the citizen. By mid-morning, he was on a commercial flight, his presence barely recognized thanks to the plain clothes and dark glasses. Passengers whispered, uncertain if it was really him or just someone playing the part. Elvis leaned back, hands clasped, rehearsing in his mind how he might address the President. He imagined Nixon's sharp, guarded eyes and wondered if the leader of the free world would see past the rhinestones to the man beneath. When he landed at National Airport, the December air cut through his coat. He hailed a cab, something he had not done in years. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror once, twice, then shook his head. To him, it was just another fare. Elvis felt a strange exhilaration. No flashing cameras, no screaming fans. For a brief moment, he was anonymous. At the gates of the White House, reality crashed back. Uniformed guards eyed him with suspicion as he presented himself. "My name's Elvis Presley," he said calmly, holding out the envelope. "I've come to see the president." The guards exchanged doubtful glances. One laughed under his breath. "And I'm Frank Sinatra," he muttered. Another stepped forward, firm but polite. "Sir, this isn't a place for impersonators." "You'll need to leave." Elvis straightened, his jaw tightening. He had walked into arenas where 50,000 people roared his name, yet here he was, dismissed like a crank. The humiliation bit deep. For a moment, he considered turning away. But then he thought of the letter in his hand, the chance to prove he was more than the sum of his hits. "I'm telling you the truth," Elvis insisted, voice steady, but carrying that unmistakable Southern timbre. Still, the guards didn't budge. One reached for his radio to call in backup. It was only after several tense minutes, when an aide inside received a hurried phone call from Graceland, that the situation shifted. Priscilla, alarmed by her husband's impulsive departure, had reached out to contacts in Washington. Within half an hour, whispers ran through the corridors. "It really is him. Elvis Presley is at the gate." At last, the guards relented. Elvis was escorted past the iron fences, through the gates where only dignitaries and generals usually walked. Yet there was no red carpet, no ceremony. Instead, he found himself in a waiting area, seated under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, surrounded by men in gray suits who barely looked at him. In that sterile room, with his letter clutched tightly in one hand and his pistol locked away by security, Elvis felt the strangest sensation of his life. To be both the king of rock and roll and an ordinary petitioner. Outside, promoters wired him an urgent telegram. "Your show is the highlight of the year. Any delay means losses in the millions. Do not risk it." He unfolded the telegram and read the words again and again. The contrast tore at him. On stage, he was untouchable, adored by millions. Here, in the heart of political power, he was just another man waiting in line, hoping to be heard. The envelope with his letter grew damp in his hands. For the first time in years, Elvis Presley felt small. Yet, beneath that humility, stirred something fiercer, a determination to prove that he could be more than an entertainer, that his voice still mattered in a world breaking apart. The corridors of the West Wing smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee gone stale. Staffers moved briskly, their shoes clicking against marble, their eyes darting toward the famous figure waiting in the reception area. Word had already spread. Elvis Presley was in the building. Some whispered it with awe, others with a kind of dismissive curiosity. To most of them, he was not a serious visitor, but an oddity, a celebrity barging into politics. Elvis sat stiffly in the chair, back straight, hands folded in his lap. His suit was neatly pressed, the golden belt gleaming under the fluorescent light. He had removed his sunglasses, and without them, he looked older, more vulnerable than the myth projected on stage. The envelope with his handwritten letter now rested with a presidential aide who promised to pass it directly to the Oval Office. Minutes stretched into an hour. Elvis could feel the sweat on his palms, his mind replaying the telegram from the promoters. Millions of dollars, contracts, expectations. Yet here he was, waiting like a man who had nothing. The irony stung. At last, a young aide in a dark suit appeared. "Mr. Presley, the President will see you now." The words carried a weight that settled into Elvis's chest. He rose, adjusted his jacket, and followed the aide down a narrow corridor. Every step echoed louder than the last. The door to the Oval Office opened, revealing the unmistakable figure of Richard Nixon, seated behind the resolute desk, papers spread before him in neat stacks. Nixon did not stand immediately. He studied Elvis for a long moment, his eyes sharp, wary. Then he rose, extending a hand. "Mr. Presley," he said in his clipped, almost mechanical tone. "It's unusual to see you here." Elvis took the hand firmly, bowing his head slightly in respect. "Thank you for receiving me, Mr. President." His voice carried both humility and determination. Nixon gestured to the sofa. They sat opposite one another, a small coffee table between them. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Elvis could feel the eyes of the aides lingering from the corners, but Nixon waved them away. For the next half hour, it would be just the two men. The president picked up the letter Elvis had written. "You say you want to help the country," Nixon began. His tone was skeptical, but not dismissive. "Most entertainers don't think beyond the stage. Why should I take this seriously?" Elvis leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I've seen it, sir. The kids, they look up to me. They follow my music, my style. And I can tell you, they're being pulled down the wrong path. Drugs, violence, confusion. They don't trust politicians. But they still listen when I sing. That gives me a responsibility." For the first time, Nixon's expression softened. He tapped his fingers against the armrest, considering. "So you want to be more than a performer?" "Yes, sir. I want to serve. Not in uniform, I did my time in the Army, but as a voice. Give me the chance, and I'll stand for the fight against narcotics, for American values. I'll do it without pay, without politics. Just as a citizen." There was a pause. Nixon's gaze grew calculating. "You realize, Mr. Presley, this isn't a publicity stunt. If you step into this, you're aligning yourself with something larger than a career. It won't be easy." "I understand," Elvis said, his jaw tight. "I'm ready." Nixon leaned back, steepling his fingers. Then came the unexpected turn. His voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "Elvis, let me be frank. The country is stretched thin. Vietnam, protests, distrust of government, everything is fragile. Your concert this week? I've been told it's enormous, that people are flying in from everywhere. But I need you to think about something." Elvis frowned. "What's that, sir?" "Cancel it," Nixon said simply. The word hit like a hammer. Elvis blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "Cancel? With respect, sir, people are counting on me. That show," Nixon cut in, "will draw headlines, will pull the nation's attention toward entertainment when what we need is focus. I don't need you singing for an arena. I need you standing as a symbol, a man who sacrifices glory for his country. Do you understand what that would mean? It would be an act of patriotism far louder than any song Elvis's pulse raced. He could still hear the roar of crowds in his head, the endless demands of fans who clung to him as though he were their lifeline. To cancel now would ignite fury. Yet here was the President of the United States asking him to do just that, to walk away from the stage and stand instead as a silent emblem. Before Elvis could respond, Nixon pressed further. "If you cancel, you'll be seen not as a performer, but as a statesman of the people." If you don't, well, you'll still be an entertainer. A successful one, but nothing more. The silence in the room grew thick. Elvis's throat felt dry. He looked at the man before him, a politician hardened by war and scandal, and realized Nixon was not offering a request. It was a directive, cloaked in politeness. Meanwhile, outside those walls, storm clouds were already gathering. Promoters, furious that Elvis had slipped away to Washington, were pressing Colonel Parker for answers. They had invested millions in advertising, ticket sales, television coverage. A cancellation would ruin them. Their calls grew heated, voices raised, threats made. If he doesn't walk on that stage, we'll sue. We'll tell the world about his health, about the pills, everything. Colonel Parker, caught between the White House and the promoters, felt the walls closing in. He sent word to Elvis's team. He has to perform. No excuses. If he doesn't, it's the end of his career. Back inside the Oval Office, Elvis sat frozen between two visions of himself. The artist adored by millions, and the patriot who could trade all of it for a higher cause. His heart thundered with the weight of the decision. For the first time in years, he felt cornered, not by contracts or by fame, but by history itself. The winter evening air in Washington was sharp enough to sting the lungs. By the time Elvis left the White House, the city was already alive with whispers. Staffers who had glimpsed him in the corridors told reporters. Within hours, the news spread. Elvis Presley had met with the president. But no one outside those walls knew the full conversation. Rumors filled the vacuum, some claiming Elvis was there to perform at a state function, others insisting he'd been offered a government role. The truth remained locked in the Oval Office. Elvis returned to his hotel, exhausted. The suite was luxurious, but the silence pressed down on him like a weight. He switched on the television. The evening news replayed grainy footage of his car arriving at the White House. Analysts speculated about why the king of rock and roll had suddenly entered the world of politics. Elvis muted the set and stared out the window. The city below was a constellation of headlights, but all he could hear was Nixon's voice. Cancel it. Not long after, the phone rang. His assistant answered, pale-faced, before handing it over. On the line were the promoters, their tone laced with fury. "Elvis, listen carefully," one of them snapped. "You walk out on that concert, you'll owe us more money than even you can count. Millions gone overnight. We'll take you to court if we have to." Elvis pinched the bridge of his nose. "I didn't say I wouldn't perform," he muttered. "Then make that clear," the voice shot back. "Because right now papers are already running headlines about you playing politics. People are asking if you'll even show up. This is the biggest event of the year, Presley. Don't forget it." The call ended, but the echo of threats lingered. Elvis set the receiver down slowly, as though it might burn him. Outside, however, another kind of storm was brewing. Word of his meeting with Nixon spread faster than the promoters could contain it. By nightfall, fans gathered at the base of the hotel, waving signs, chanting his name. Some were pleading, "Elvis, sing for us." Others demanded, "Don't abandon your fans." Their voices rose in a chorus that no curtain of glass could block out. Police were forced to erect barriers. Journalists crowded the sidewalks, their flashbulbs bursting like fireworks whenever the hotel curtains moved. The whole scene felt less like an adoring crowd and more like a trial by fire. Elvis paced the suite, listening to the chants filter up through the walls. The pressure was relentless, from the government, from the promoters, from the very people who once lifted him higher than anyone alive. As the night deepened, he found himself drawn to the balcony doors. He slid them open, letting the winter air flood in. The noise of the crowd swelled instantly, screams and cheers crashing together. Flashbulbs lit the street like lightning. Elvis stepped forward, the cold biting through his suit. For a moment, he simply stood, silent, looking down at the faces turned upward. Thousands of eyes fixed on him, desperate for reassurance, for clarity. He could feel their hunger, their need for him to promise that nothing had changed. Instead, he leaned on the railing, his voice low but clear enough to cut through the night. America needs truth tonight. The words were simple, but they dropped like stones into water, sending ripples that none could predict. For a heartbeat, the crowd fell silent, trying to make sense of what he had said. Then the shouts began again, louder, more frantic. Reporters scribbled the line into notebooks. Phones rang in newsrooms. Headlines were drafted before he even turned back inside. Behind him, his aides exchanged worried glances. One whispered, "You've just set off something we can't contain." But Elvis only stared out over the crowd a moment longer, his face unreadable, before retreating into the room. Within an hour, the phrase was everywhere. Radio hosts repeated it, puzzled. Newspapers rushed out late editions. America needs truth tonight. Elvis speaks from Washington balcony. Promoters were livid, convinced he was preparing to abandon the stage. Colonel Parker received call after call, his voice rising as he barked promises that Elvis would perform. Yet, in his gut, he wasn't sure anymore. Back at the hotel, Elvis sat in a chair by the window, watching the crowd linger despite the cold. Their signs bobbed up and down, their chants rolling like waves. He pressed a hand to his chest, where the telegram from earlier still sat folded in his pocket. On one side, money and contracts. On the other, a president's request. And now, layered over both, the cry of his fans. It struck him with sudden clarity. No matter what choice he made, someone would feel betrayed. If he obeyed Nixon, he would devastate those outside holding his name on poster boards. If he obeyed the promoters, he would ignore the president's plea and risk being remembered as an entertainer unwilling to sacrifice. And if he tried to serve both, he might destroy himself in the process. The shouting from below rose again, filling the room like a tidal surge. Elvis leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself words no one else could hear. "The truth, huh? Then I'll give them the truth." But on my own terms, the lobby of the Washington Hilton smelled of cigars and nervous sweat. Long after midnight, in a private suite with curtains drawn and ashtrays overflowing, the real battle was being fought. Colonel Tom Parker sat at the head of the table, his rotund figure half swallowed by a cloud of smoke, a tumbler of bourbon sweating beside him. Across from him, two promoters in tailored suits leaned forward, faces tight with fury. The glow of a single lamp cast their shadows long against the walls. "You'd better get your boy under control," one snapped, jabbing a finger toward Parker. "That balcony stunt tonight? Talking about truth? The press is eating it up. If he cancels, we're ruined." Parker blew a slow stream of smoke, his eyes narrowing. Gentlemen, Elvis is not canceling anything. He's just dramatic. Always has been." His tone was oily, reassuring, but underneath it, he was calculating. The second promoter slammed a fist against the table. "Don't play games. We've sunk millions into this show. Advertising, bookings, sponsors. If he pulls out, we'll bury him in court. You understand? We'll bury him." For a long moment, Parker said nothing. He swirled the bourbon, watching the ice clink. Then, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he replied, "You threaten Elvis, you threaten me. And let me tell you, Elvis isn't stupid. He knows he needs me more than anyone. If the president wants him as a symbol, well, maybe that's not such a bad thing. The promoters exchanged alarmed looks. You mean politics? Parker leaned forward, his grin widening. Think about it. A new image, bigger than concerts, bigger than Vegas. Imagine Elvis the Patriot, Elvis the defender of American values. The headlines alone could be worth more than ticket sales. If he plays this right, we all make money. Different money, but money nonetheless. The room fell silent. For the first time, the promoters sensed that Parker wasn't there to shield Elvis, but to weigh his options, perhaps even sell him to the highest bidder, whether it was the stage or the White House. What none of them realized was that Elvis himself was standing just outside the suite, in the dimly lit hallway. He had gone for a late-night walk to clear his head, only to hear voices leaking through the half-open door. He froze, recognizing Parker's tone instantly. Pressed against the wallpaper, Elvis listened as his manager, the man who had guided his career for more than a decade, spoke of him not as an artist, not even as a friend, but as a commodity, a pawn in a larger game. His fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. The conversation inside grew harsher. One promoter said, "We can spin this. We'll leak to the press that he's betraying his fans, that he's walking out for politics. Let the public shame him back onto the stage. No one wants to see their idol turn into a politician." The other added, "Exactly. Headlines sell faster than lawsuits. Tomorrow's front page, Elvis betrays his fans. That'll scare him straight." Elvis felt the words like knives. He could almost hear the mockery in the morning papers, could see the photographs of disappointed fans plastered beside damning captions. For years, he had fought to be seen as more than a novelty act, as someone whose voice carried weight. Now, his own team was conspiring to cut his legs out from under him. Inside, Parker's gravelly chuckle filled the air. "Let them print what they want. I'll spin it back. I always do. Elvis may be the king, but I'm the one who makes sure the crown stays on his head." Don't forget that Elvis stepped back from the door, his pulse hammering. He felt both rage and betrayal boiling in his chest. For so long he had trusted Parker to guard him, to shield him from sharks like these. But tonight he saw it clearly. Parker was no shield. He was just another player at the table, gambling with Elvis's life. He walked away down the hall, the carpet muffling his steps. Each stride felt heavier, as though the weight of betrayal pressed harder on his shoulders. When he reached his suite, he shut the door quietly and stood in the dark, breathing hard. The sound of the crowd outside had dwindled to a murmur, but inside his head it roared louder than ever. The cigar smoke, the whispered threats, Parker's cynical laugh. They clung to him like shadows. Elvis poured himself a glass of water, staring at his reflection in the mirror above the minibar. The face staring back was weary, lined deeper than his years, eyes red with sleeplessness. For the first time, he admitted what he had always feared. The men who claimed to protect him might very well destroy him if it suited their pocketbooks. He set the glass down with a sharp clink. Alone in the silence, Elvis made a vow under his breath. "If I'm going down, it won't be as their puppet. It'll be on my own terms." The hotel room was dark except for the dim glow of a bedside lamp. Washington's night pressed against the windows, the muffled hum of distant traffic the only sound breaking the silence. Elvis sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders hunched, the weight of the day heavy on him. The betrayal he had overheard in the smoky suite still rang in his ears. Parker's voice, once the anchor of his career, now sounded like the voice of a man ready to sell him off to the highest bidder. Sleep refused to come. Restless, He reached for the guitar resting against the wall. The wood was worn, the strings slightly out of tune. He plucked softly, letting notes drift into the silence. A song emerged, not for an audience, not for screaming fans, but for himself. His voice was raw, stripped of stage bravado, carrying a kind of broken sincerity that belonged to a man at war with his own reflection. The melody filled the room with something fragile and haunting. He closed his eyes and allowed himself, just for a moment, to be the boy from Tupelo again. A boy who once dreamed of singing gospel to lift spirits, not of filling contracts or dodging lawsuits. The man who conquered Vegas felt 1,000 miles away. A knock came at the door. Elvis stopped mid-chord, tense. Few dared disturb him at this hour. After a pause, the door opened slowly, and Jerry Schilling, one of the few in his circle he still trusted, stepped inside. Dressed simply in a sweater and jeans, Jerry looked at him with concern, rather than calculation. "Elvis," Jerry said softly, shutting the door behind him. "You all right?" Elvis set the guitar aside. "You ever get the feeling you're being pushed from both sides until there's nothing left of you?" His voice was low, almost a growl. Jerry pulled up a chair, sitting opposite. "I know what's going on. The promoters, the colonel, the papers. It's all closing in. But you've got to decide what matters most. If you cancel, they'll bleed you dry in court. If you obey Nixon, your fans might turn on you. Either way, it's gonna hurt." Elvis leaned forward, his eyes sharp, restless. "So what do I do? Let them drag me across the front pages as a sellout? Or stand with a president who doesn't care about the music, just about using me as a symbol? Hell, Jerry, I don't even know who I am anymore." Jerry studied him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You're the man who walked into the White House without an invitation. You're the man who still has kids waiting outside this hotel in the freezing cold, hoping you'll sing to them. You've got more power than you think. The question is, are you going to use it for yourself, or let everyone else use it for you?" The words cut through the fog. Elvis sat back, rubbing his temples. He felt torn in half. On one side, the colonel's machinations and the promoter's threats. On the other, Nixon's cold demand to cancel. And between them, the voices of fans chanting his name. He had always been the man who wanted to please everyone, but tonight he saw the truth. Pleasing everyone meant pleasing no one. Least of all, himself. The guitar still lay beside him, the strings humming faintly from where he had set it down. He reached for it again, strummed a single chord, then let his hand rest. "Jerry, I think I've been running from this for too long," he whispered. "I wanted the Army to prove I was more than a singer. I wanted movies to show I was more than a performer. Now Nixon wants me to be more than a concert act. Maybe it's time I stop asking who they want me to be, and decide who I want to be." Jerry nodded slowly. "Then what's your move?" For a long stretch of silence, Elvis stared at the carpet, his mind racing. His jaw tightened. His eyes, weary moments ago, now carried a glint of steel. "I'll do the show," he said finally. Jerry raised his brows. "The way they want it?" Elvis shook his head. "No, my way. I won't cancel, but I won't give them the spectacle they're expecting either. I'll walk out there and turn that stage into something else. Not just lights and songs, but a message. If the president wants me to speak, I'll speak through music. If the promoters want their crowd, they'll get it. But neither of them will control me." Jerry sat back, a slow grin tugging at his mouth. "That sounds like the Elvis I know." Elvis stood, pacing the room, energy surging through him for the first time in days. It's risky. They'll all come after me. The Colonel, the papers, maybe even the White House. But I can't spend the rest of my life being their puppet. Tomorrow night, I'll sing. But I'll tell the truth while I'm at it. And the truth? Well, that's something no one can sue me for. He stopped by the window, pulling the curtain aside. The crowd was still there, smaller now but still chanting into the night. Their breath fogged the cold air, their voices hoarse but unwavering. Elvis watched them with something close to reverence. "They're the only reason I've got this crown," he said softly. "So tomorrow, I'll give them more than a show. I'll give them what I've been holding back all along." For the first time in days, his decision felt clear. The fear and doubt had not vanished, but they no longer ruled him. Instead, he felt something older, something that had carried him from Tupelo to the world stage. Defiance. He turned back to Jerry, his voice calm but resolute. "Tomorrow night, I'll show them who I really am." Morning broke gray and heavy over Washington, a sky swollen with winter clouds. The city seemed to hum with rumors. Headlines screamed speculation. Elvis and Nixon. Secret deal? Concert at risk of collapse. Newspapers, stacked at every corner, carried his face, not as a performer, but as a question mark. Was the king about to abandon his throne? Inside his hotel suite, Elvis stood before the mirror, pulling on the tailored white shirt he would wear beneath his stage costume. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn from sleepless nights, but there was a steadiness in him now. The decision had been made. The weight of it pressed down hard, but he carried it like a man carrying his own cross. Outside, chaos ruled. Fans camped overnight in front of the arena, bundled in blankets, clutching hand-painted signs. "Don't let us down, Elvis. We believe in you." Their chants carried across the barricades police had erected, a constant hum that rattled nerves. Vendors hawked buttons and scarves. Television crews rolled in, and the scene felt more like a protest than a concert. Promoters, however, were preparing for disaster. They met with lawyers in back rooms of the arena, stacks of contracts spread across tables. One of them slammed a fist against the papers. "If he so much as breathes politics on that stage, we've got grounds to pull him down." The colonel signed the agreements. They're ironclad. Another muttered, "It doesn't matter what Parker promised. If Elvis breaks the act, we'll drag him through the courts until he bleeds." Meanwhile, Colonel Parker stormed through the corridors of the hotel, barking at staff, his jowls quivering with rage. "Tell the press he's fine. Tell the sponsors he's fine. Tell everyone the damn show is going on. And for God's sake, don't let him near another balcony." His voice echoed like thunder, but beneath the bluster was panic. He knew Elvis was no longer predictable, no longer obedient to the machinery that had built him. By early afternoon, the tension grew unbearable. Elvis sat in the dressing room of the arena, alone for a moment. The air smelled of hairspray and fresh paint, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. On the vanity lay his stage costume, glittering with rhinestones, a uniform of power and expectation. He reached out, touched the fabric, then pulled his hand back as though it burned him. The door creaked open. A man in a crisp suit entered, not a promoter, not the colonel. He introduced himself quietly as an aide from the White House. "Mr. Presley," he said, his voice cool, professional. "I bring a message directly from the president." Elvis stiffened. "Go on." The aide adjusted his tie, his eyes fixed. "The president insists that you cancel tonight's performance. This isn't just a request anymore. It's a directive." He believes your presence on that stage will distract from the country's greater needs. He asks that you show loyalty. Elvis stared at him, silent for several long seconds. Then he leaned forward, his voice calm, almost gentle. You tell the president this. I've never walked away from my people. Not once. I won't start tonight. The aide opened his mouth to protest, but Elvis's eyes cut him off. A flash of fire burned there, not anger alone, but conviction. The kind of look that ended conversations. The aide nodded stiffly, turned, and left without another word. Elvis rose, the tension coiling inside him turning into something sharper, clearer. He stepped toward the costume, lifted it from the hanger, and slipped it on piece by piece. The weight of the rhinestones felt heavier than ever, but this time it wasn't just fabric. It was armor. Outside the dressing room, the arena pulsed with noise. Fans packed every seat, their anticipation trembling in the air. The sound of their voices filtered backstage like the roar of an ocean. Reporters jostled near the entrances, cameras ready, waiting for the story that might define the decade. Would Elvis Presley perform or walk away? Colonel Parker shoved through the backstage crowd, red-faced, sweat beading at his temples. He cornered Elvis just as the singer adjusted his collar. "Don't you dare ruin this, boy," Parker hissed, his accent thick, his voice trembling with both fear and rage. "You stick to the songs we rehearsed. You smile, you bow, you give them the show they paid for." Nothing more. Elvis met his gaze steadily, no tremor in his own. "I'll give them more than they paid for," he said, "and there's nothing you can do to stop it." For a heartbeat, Parker was speechless. He opened his mouth to argue, but the roar from the arena swallowed his words. The announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley." The backstage crew moved into action, hustling into positions, cables snapping taut, spotlights burning to life. Elvis stood tall, shoulders squared, every muscle alive with the knowledge that what he was about to do could break his career or save his soul. He stepped toward the curtain, each stride measured, deliberate. The noise on the other side was deafening now, tens of thousands of voices merging into one tidal wave of expectation. Elvis paused just short of the stage entrance, his hand brushing the edge of the heavy velvet drape. Behind him, Parker shouted, "Remember who made you, son?" Elvis didn't look back. Instead, he whispered under his breath, words no one but he could hear. "I know who I am." And then, as the curtain parted and the lights struck him like a storm, Elvis Presley walked onto the stage, not as the man his handlers demanded, nor as the symbol the president wanted, but as something more dangerous and more true. Himself. The first step into the light was blinding. Spotlights carved Elvis into a silhouette of rhinestones and white fabric, his figure gleaming like something more myth than man. The crowd erupted, a tidal wave of cheers, screams, applause so loud it seemed to shake the rafters of the arena. For a moment, it was the same as always. Elvis, the king, adored without question. But inside, he carried a storm. Every word from Nixon, every threat from the promoters, every chant from the fans outside the hotel. They collided in his chest as he looked out at thousands of expectant faces. The band waited for his signal, guitars tuned, drums poised. Normally, he would slip into rhythm without hesitation. Tonight, he did something no one expected. He raised a hand. The arena hushed, not instantly, but slowly, curiosity taming the frenzy. A ripple of confusion spread across the sea of people. Elvis stepped to the microphone, his shadow stretching across the stage floor. He took a breath, and his voice rang out steady, deliberate. Tonight, he said, I was told not to stand here. I was told to cancel this show, to walk away, to let silence be my answer. He paused, letting the words hang. The silence in the arena deepened. Even the air felt still. But I don't believe in silence. I believe in truth. And music. Music is truth. You can hear. Murmurs ran through the audience. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances. This wasn't the polished patter of an entertainer. This was confession, declaration. Some folks say I'm just a singer, Elvis continued, his eyes scanning the rows of faces. But I've lived long enough to know a song can do more than sell tickets. A song can lift a man when nothing else can. A song can remind us who we are from backstage. Panic ignited. Promoters shouted at technicians. One barked, "Cut the mic!" Another lunged toward the soundboard. But the chief technician, a man Elvis had spoken with quietly that afternoon, shook his head. The mic line had been rerouted, wired separately. Elvis had made sure of it. His voice thundered through the arena, untouchable. He leaned closer to the microphone, the intensity in his eyes unmistakable. So, I'll tell you plain, I won't cancel. I won't hide. Not for politics, not for money. I'm here because you're here. And if America needs truth tonight, then let's find it together. The audience was silent, stunned. And then, a swell of cheers, louder, deeper. Not the shrieks of idol worship, but the roar of recognition. People were on their feet, clapping, shouting his name. The electricity in the air was unlike anything Elvis had ever felt. He motioned to the band. The opening chords began, not of the expected hit, but of If I Can Dream. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was the anthem of defiance he had sung once before, at the '68 comeback special, but he had avoided it on this tour. Too political, too raw. Tonight, it was exactly what he needed. The first line left his lips like a prayer set to fire. His voice, powerful yet trembling with emotion, filled the cavernous arena. The lyrics, written in the wake of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, now took on new meaning. Hope carved out of chaos. Unity pulled from division. The audience fell into reverent silence. Some clasped hands, some wiped tears, others simply stood, transfixed. The glow of lighters began to flicker across the seats, 1,000 tiny flames illuminating faces wet with emotion. Behind the curtain, chaos turned to desperation. One promoter slammed his fist into the wall. "He's turning this into a rally!" Colonel Parker bellowed at the staff. "Shut it down!" But security, loyal more to Elvis than to Parker, blocked the path. "No one touches that stage," one guard growled. On stage, Elvis was unstoppable. Each line grew stronger, the song swelling until it wasn't just performance, it was testimony. He closed his eyes, his body trembling with the force of the words. By the final verse, the arena was a single voice rising with him. Thousands of strangers united in a collective cry for something larger than themselves. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was almost holy. Then the eruption came. Cheers, sobs, applause that rolled like thunder. Elvis stepped back, chest heaving, sweat glistening under the lights. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, and for the first time in years, he felt not like an idol, but like a man who had spoken directly to the soul of his people. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. Instead, he leaned into the microphone once more. This isn't about sides. It isn't about power. It's about remembering who we are. Don't forget that the audience roared again, the sound crashing against the walls. For them, this wasn't just another Elvis show. It was history being written in real time. Backstage, Parker collapsed into a chair, his face pale, muttering curses under his breath. The promoters shouted into phones, calling lawyers, sponsors, anyone who would listen. But out front, in the light, their power had vanished. The stage belonged entirely to Elvis, and for the first time he realized it wasn't just a stage anymore. It was a pulpit. The sound inside the arena still trembled from the last chords of "If I Can Dream." The crowd was on its feet, clapping in unison, their voices rising in a chant that shook the rafters. "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" To the audience, the moment was pure triumph. But backstage, panic had reached its breaking point. Colonel Parker stormed back and forth, his face red, sweat soaking the collar of his shirt. He barked at stagehands who avoided his eyes. "Shut it down. Drop the curtain. Kill the lights. I don't care how. Do it now before he ruins us all." His voice cracked like a whip, but the crew hesitated. They had worked with Elvis for years. Tonight, they saw something in him they'd never seen before, a man refusing to be tamed. One promoter snatched a phone receiver off the wall, shouting into it over the din. "He's hijacking the show. He's turning this into a damn political rally. If this goes on, sponsors will bolt, contracts are void. Do something." The voice on the other end was even sharper. A presidential advisor, pressed against the chaos of the moment, hissed into the line, "Hold the line until we speak to the president. We cannot allow him to escalate. Watch carefully. If he crosses into politics, this will be a national problem." But Elvis wasn't slowing. On stage, he gave a subtle nod to the band. Instead of breaking for an intermission, he motioned for them to launch into another song. The musicians exchanged wary glances, then obeyed. The opening notes of An American Trilogy rolled out. Soft, haunting, unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the arena. Everyone knew this piece was dangerous ground. It wasn't just a medley, it was a declaration, blending Dixie, Battle Hymn of the Republic, and All My Trials. It was America's past and present colliding in one arrangement. For years, critics had argued it was too polarizing, too emotional. Tonight, Elvis chose it with precision. The first words left his lips gently, almost like a lullaby. "Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton." The Southern hymn floated over the crowd, pulling on roots older than the nation's fractures. The audience grew still, every ear straining. Then, as the medley swelled into "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah," his voice surged, strong and unyielding. The orchestra thundered behind him, drums pounding like distant cannons. The lights flared, illuminating rows upon rows of faces. Men and women crying, clutching one another, rising to their feet in reverence. It was no longer a concert. It was communion. Backstage, the promoters shouted louder, veins bulging in their temples. "Pull the plug! Now!" But when they lunged toward the power switch, they were stopped by two of Elvis's bodyguards, who stepped forward, arms folded, blocking the way. "Nobody cuts him off," one growled. Their presence was immovable, a wall of loyalty forged over years of friendship. Colonel Parker threw his hat to the ground, stamping it underfoot. "You'll destroy him," he screamed. "Don't you idiots see? He's finished if he keeps this up." But out front, Elvis pressed on, pouring his soul into every syllable. By the time he reached the tender close of All My Trials, the arena was vibrating with something indescribable. Grown men wept openly. Women raised lighters high above their heads, and teenagers stared wide-eyed, as though realizing for the first time that their idol was not just a singer, but a voice carrying the weight of an entire nation. In the shadows of the wings, a man in a dark suit spoke hurriedly into a phone, his hand shielding his mouth. "Yes, sir," he said into the receiver. "He's continuing. No, sir, we haven't stopped him. He's performing Trilogy now. Yes, yes, I understand. I'll keep you updated. He hung up, his expression tight. Orders from Washington had been clear. Keep Presley within bounds, but do not create a public spectacle by dragging him off stage. And so, the gamble continued. The final swell of the orchestra lifted the arena to its peak. Elvis stood center stage, chest heaving, face glistening with sweat, as the last notes of Hallelujah thundered through the hall. He held the microphone with both hands, his body trembling as if every ounce of him had been poured into the performance. When the music stopped, silence washed over the crowd. For a second, the entire arena seemed suspended in time. Then, as if released from a spell, the audience erupted. The roar was deafening, a storm of applause, cheers, tears, and stomping feet. People hugged strangers beside them. Others lifted their arms as though in prayer. Cameras flashed furiously, capturing images that would appear on front pages across the country by morning. Elvis lowered his head, eyes closed, and let the noise wash over him. He had crossed a line tonight, one that could not be uncrossed. He knew it. The colonel knew it. The president would know it soon enough. But in that moment, standing in the center of the storm, he felt strangely at peace. The stage lights dimmed slightly as the band set down their instruments, waiting for direction. Promoters continued to shout from backstage, but their voices no longer mattered. Elvis had taken command of the night, and nothing, no contract, no politician, no manager, could silence him now. The arena smelled of sweat, cigarette smoke, and electricity. The noise of the crowd was thunderous, but Elvis stood in the center of it all, chest heaving, microphone heavy in his hand. He had given them If I Can Dream. He had given them an American trilogy. He had defied the colonel, the promoters, even the president himself. And still, the people roared for more. He turned to the band and lifted a hand. Silence descended, curious, hesitant. The musicians froze in place, eyes darting. Elvis stepped forward alone, the spotlight narrowing to follow him. He crouched slightly, placed the microphone gently on the stage floor, and began to walk away. The gesture was unmistakable. The show was over. But as he reached the shadows near the curtain, something pulled him back. He stopped, pivoted, and returned slowly to the microphone. The crowd hushed, sensing that whatever was about to happen would not be a song. He bent down, lifted the mic again, and spoke in a voice stripped of all performance, all pretense. "I may be called a king," he said, the words rolling with gravity, "but the real king is the people. Tonight, it wasn't managers or presidents who told me to sing. It was you. And because you asked, I sang, the arena erupted. Some screamed, some cried, some simply stood motionless, their mouths open as though they had witnessed something larger than entertainment. Flashbulbs burst across the hall like a field of stars. For once, the headlines were being written not by promoters or politicians, but by Elvis himself. Backstage, Parker slumped into a chair, his face gray, a cigar hanging unlit between his fingers. He knew in that instant that he had lost control. The man he had managed, packaged, and sold for years had slipped beyond his grasp. In Washington, aides scrambled. Within an hour, telexes hummed with reports. Presley defies presidential directive, turns concert into national spectacle. Nixon, in the Oval Office, read the transcripts with pursed lips, muttering to his advisers, "The man's a showman, but he's dangerous when he believes it's more than a show." For Elvis, none of that mattered in the moment. He bowed his head, whispered a quiet "thank you" into the microphone, and walked off stage for real this time. The curtain fell, the lights dimmed, but the noise of the crowd refused to fade. Their chant, "Elvis! Elvis!" echoed through the corridors as he made his way backstage. The dressing room was quiet when he entered. The costume clung to his body, soaked with sweat, rhinestones dulled by exhaustion. He unbuttoned the top, loosened the belt, and collapsed into the chair before the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was not the glowing icon from the posters, but a tired man, lines etched deep around his eyes, skin pale beneath the makeup. For a long time, he sat in silence. No colonel, no promoters, no aides, just Elvis and his own thoughts. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a towel, wiping sweat from his face. In the mirror, he caught sight of something unexpected, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the polished grin of the stage, but something quieter, deeper. Relief, perhaps, or peace. He thought back to Tupelo, to the boy who sang in church pews with his mother, to the young soldier in Germany, to the man who had begged Hollywood to give him serious roles, and to the singer who had fought for his comeback on live television. All of it had led to this night, to this choice. And for the first time in years, he felt he had chosen for himself. Outside, the roar of the crowd slowly began to fade as people filed out of the arena, still buzzing, still clutching at each other, still repeating his words. The real king is the people. Journalists rushed to pay phones, their voices urgent, filing stories that would run coast to coast by dawn. By midnight, headlines were already being drafted. Elvis defies president, sings for the people. The king crowns his audience. Presley chooses truth over politics. Some would praise him as a hero. Others would condemn him as reckless. Lawsuits would still loom, and Nixon's circle would mutter about betrayal. But none of that could erase what had happened inside the arena. Back in his dressing room, Elvis leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His body ached. His voice was raw. He felt utterly spent. And yet, inside, there was a stillness he had not known in years. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. Tonight mattered. The words barely left his lips, but they carried more weight than 1,000 encores. For once, he wasn't measuring himself by ticket sales, chart positions, or applause. He was measuring himself by truth. And truth, he realized, was the only crown worth wearing. He lifted his eyes one last time to the mirror. The man looking back was older, wearier, fragile. But behind that, in the reflection, was something else. Dignity. Elvis leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes, and let the silence hold him. The roar of the arena, the orders from Washington, the threats from Parker. All of it drifted away. In its place remained only the faint hum of his own heartbeat, and the knowledge that, for one night, he had stood alone and unafraid. The king had defied them all, not for glory, not for power, but for truth. And that truth would outlive him.